Some of the most powerful lessons you carry might come from things that never happened. Your library has a ghostwriter, and you've never met them. Throughout life, we all collect lessons. Some are written clearly, like notes taped to the fridge. Others are written in disappearing ink. You can feel them, but you cannot quite read them. Somewhere inside you there's a book, not a literal one, but something that functions like one. A collection of everything you've learned about how life works. The earliest lessons are simple. The stove is hot, gravity works, fire does not care about your intentions. These are lessons that arrive like bruises. You touch, you recoil, and the meaning is shared by almost everyone who has ever touched a flame. But later, something changes. The lessons stop being physical and start being emotional. And emotional lessons are strange because they do not arrive labeled. They arrive as interpretations. Let's say you take a shot at something, a new job, a relationship, a creative risk, and you miss badly. How do you log that entry in your ledger? One person might focus on the sting of the failure. They grab a thick red marker and write, "Never try again. The shame is unbearable." Another person experiencing the exact same event might notice that they survived the fall. They might note that the fear they held before the attempt has lost its teeth. They write, "Trying is important, regardless of the outcome, because it shrinks fear." Same event, two wildly different operating instructions for the future. But here's the thing I want you to consider. What if not every chapter was written by you? What if some of them were written by someone else entirely? Someone who has access to your book when you're not looking. Someone who adds lessons while you sleep. I had a dream recently, and something happened in that dream that made me realize we might need to talk about this. Before I tell you about the dream, I want you to do something with me. Picture a library. It doesn't have to be grand. Maybe it's a small room with wooden shelves. Maybe it's a single bookcase in the corner of your mind. Whatever feels right. Now imagine there's one book on those shelves that's different from the others. It has no title on the spine. The cover is blank. But this is the most important book in the entire room because this book contains every lesson you've ever learned about how to navigate being alive. I'd like you to imagine picking up that book and holding it for just a moment, feel its weight, notice how thick it's become, then place it back on the shelf and close the door to that room. We'll come back to it. There's something worth noticing about how lessons arrive in our lives. Imagine you're driving home. It's late. The road is empty. You see someone pulled over with their hazard lights on. They're standing outside their car, looking at what appears to be a flat tire. They seem stuck. You could stop and help. You could also keep driving. If you stop and help and everything goes fine, maybe you learn nothing at all. The experience doesn't leave a mark. But if you stop and something goes wrong, if they weren't really stuck, if it was a trap, if you get robbed or hurt, well, that experience leaves a mark. That experience writes a lesson in your book with permanent ink. Don't stop for strangers. And here's the uncomfortable truth. That lesson is rational, it's logical. If you've been burned, it makes complete sense to avoid the fire. The math adds up. But is it the right lesson? This is where things get interesting, because some lessons that are perfectly rational to learn might not be lessons that serve you well. You avoid getting robbed again, sure, but you also lose something. You lose the version of yourself who would have stopped. You lose dozens of genuine moments of connection with strangers who actually needed help. You lose something harder to measure than a stolen wallet. The lesson protects you, but the lesson also diminishes you. And here's what I keep thinking about. The people who never had that bad experience, who stopped for 100 strangers and never got burned, they get to keep the better version of themselves, not because they're wiser, not because they made better choices, just because the random cruelty of life happened to miss them. This is where we fall victim to the availability bias. Our brains are designed to prioritize information that is available to our memory, usually things that are recent, frequent, or most importantly, emotionally vivid. Because the trauma of a bad experience is so vivid, it takes up more space in your library than the thousands of times you drove past a stranger and nothing happened at all. You don't build a philosophy out of the nothing moments, you build it out of the loud moments. Luck becomes philosophy, misfortune becomes worldview. We mistake the most available memories for the most accurate truths, but we were talking about libraries and ghostwriters and dreams. So here's what happened. I had a dream a few nights ago. The details don't matter. What matters is that something happened in the dream, something like the roadside scenario. An event occurred that, if it had happened in real life, would have taught me a lesson. And then, while still dreaming, I noticed something. I caught myself filing the lesson away. I felt my mind adding a new chapter to the book. A conclusion was being drawn, a rule was being created, all of this from an event that never happened. The dream lasted maybe 5 minutes. I woke up and remembered it, which is unusual, but I started wondering about all the dreams I don't remember, because here's a fact that's worth sitting with. We spend roughly 90 to 120 minutes in REM sleep each night. That's the phase where most dreaming occurs. My 5-minute dream was just 5 minutes. What about the other 100 minutes? What about the dreams that came before and after? The ones that evaporated the moment I opened my eyes? What if lessons are being written in our books every single night by experiences that never happened? Think about what this means. Every night, your brain generates scenarios. Some of them are nonsense, but some of them feel real. Real enough that your sleeping mind takes them seriously. Real enough that conclusions get drawn. Real enough that when you wake up, you might have a new opinion about something, a new hesitation, a new fear, and you won't know why. You'll think it's intuition, you'll think it's wisdom, you'll think it's just how you feel. But maybe it's a chapter that was written at 3 a.m. by a version of events that never occurred. The ghostwriter. I don't know about you, but this unsettles me because I like to believe that my lessons, my philosophy, my understanding of how life works, I like to believe those came from my experiences, from things I actually lived through, from reality. But what if a significant portion of who I am, of what I believe, of how I make decisions, what if some of that was shaped by fiction, by the arbitrary narratives my brain generated while I was unconscious? You might be more afraid of dogs than you realize you should be because of a dream you had when you were 7 and forgot by breakfast. You might trust a certain kind of person less because your sleeping mind rehearsed a betrayal that never happened. You might avoid certain risks, pursue certain comforts, hold certain beliefs, all because of chapters in your book that were written by stories rather than events, and you would never know. Here's another thought that might be worth holding. We dream every night. Let's say conservatively that you have meaningful dreams for an hour each night. That's 365 hours per year. Over a lifetime, we're talking about thousands of hours of experience that your brain treats as real enough to learn from. Thousands of hours of lessons from events that never happened. I don't know how much influence those dreams have. Maybe the lessons fade with time. Maybe the brain sorts out fiction from reality better than I'm giving it credit for, but I'm not sure. And the uncertainty itself feels important. Because if even a small percentage of our internal philosophy comes from dreams, that changes something. It means the book we carry, the one that guides our choices, has chapters we didn't write from experiences we didn't have. It means we're all walking around with lessons we've never examined because we don't know they exist. Now let me describe a possibility, not a prediction, just something to consider. Imagine that one day technology exists that could record your dreams, not just vaguely, but in detail. Every scenario your brain generates while you sleep, captured and stored. Most of us wouldn't have time to review 2 hours of dream content every morning. That would be impractical. The nonsense to insight ratio would be exhausting. But what if an AI could watch for you? What if there was a system that observed your dreams over years, noting patterns, remembering scenarios, building a map of all the fictional experiences your brain has processed, and then, at a crucial moment, it could speak up. You're at a fork in the road, you're about to add a new lesson to your book. You're drawing a conclusion from something that happened, and the AI says, before you write that chapter, you might want to know about this dream you had. It happened 8 years ago. You don't remember it, but in that dream, something similar occurred, and you made a decision about what it meant. And ever since then, you've carried that interpretation without knowing where it came from. The reason you're taking this particular lesson from this particular moment might have something to do with that dream. It wouldn't tell you what to do. It wouldn't rob you of your agency. It would just urge you to think twice, to verify your sources, to make sure the author of your life's rulebook is actually you in your waking hours. There's a question underneath all of this that might be worth asking ourselves. How much of who we are is really us? I don't mean that in a philosophical way, like some abstract puzzle about identity. I mean it practically. How many of the rules we live by, the fears we carry, the assumptions we make about people and situations, how many of those came from actual learning, and how many came from the arbitrary fiction of our sleeping minds? Maybe most of our lessons are legitimately earned. Maybe dreams have less influence than I'm imagining, but the possibility alone seems worth acknowledging. Because if even some of what we believe came from experiences that never happened, that gives us a kind of permission. Permission to question, permission to wonder whether a lesson that feels like wisdom might actually be a scar from a wound that was never inflicted. Permission to ask, before we close the door on a part of life, whether we're doing it for reasons we actually examined or for reasons that were written while we slept. Remember the library from earlier? The room with the shelves? The book with no title? I'd like you to go back there now, open the door, walk to the shelf, pick up the book. But this time, as you hold it, consider something. This book doesn't have a single author. Some chapters were written by moments of pain that actually happened. Some were written by joy you actually experienced. Some were written by mentors, by friends, by strangers who taught you something true. But some chapters, maybe more than you realized, were written in the dark by a mind dreaming of things that never occurred. And that's not necessarily bad. Our dreaming mind might sometimes write wisdom. It might rehearse dangers that are worth avoiding, even if the specific scenario was fictional. But it might also write fear where fear doesn't belong. It might write caution where caution costs more than it saves. It might write lessons that feel like conclusions but are actually just stories. The goal isn't to reject everything we learned in dreams. The goal is to know that we can't always tell the difference. So here's what I'm left with. Every day, life presents us with moments that could become lessons. We interpret what happened, we decide what it means. We add a new chapter to the book. But maybe, before we write in ink, we could pause and ask ourselves, where is this interpretation coming from? Does it come from the experience itself, or does it come from something older, something that might have been planted long before by events that only existed in my sleep? There's something useful about that pause, not because we'll always have the answer, we won't, but the question itself creates a little space, a moment between experience and conclusion where we can choose to look more carefully. Maybe the future does bring technology that records our dreams and helps us understand which lessons are earned and which lessons were gifted by our ghostwriter. Maybe someday we'll have a way to sort through the chapters and know where each one came from. But even without that technology, we can do something simpler. We can notice when we're adding a new lesson to the book. We can ask whether the interpretation we're choosing is the only one available. We can wonder, just for a moment, whether the person we're becoming was decided by us or whether some of it was decided by stories we'll never remember. Your library has a ghostwriter and you've never met them. But maybe the future does bring technology that records our dreams and helps us understand which lessons are earned and which lessons were gifted by our ghostwriter. Maybe someday we'll have a way to sort through the chapters and know where each one came from. But even without that technology, we can do something simpler. We can notice when we're adding a new lesson to the book. We can ask whether the interpretation we're choosing is the only one available. We can wonder, just for a moment, whether the person we're becoming was decided by us or whether some of it was decided by stories we'll never remember. Your library has a ghostwriter and you've never met them. But now you know they exist, and maybe that's the first step toward meeting them after all.